next weeks together to explore the concept of our Christian character. We'll be drawing largely on a book by theologian N.T. Wright, who writes a book to that end called After You Believe, Why Christian Character Matters. And his thesis is that believing in Jesus Christ is not simply about eternal salvation after you die. That believing in Jesus Christ affects everyday living in ways that matter eternally. The story is told of a famous golfer who, responding to a reporter who called him lucky, said, "I've noticed the harder I practice, the luckier I get." And it raises for me the question, is who we are a matter of luck? Or is it a matter of practice? How do we think clearly and wisely about what to do in our personal lives, in our church lives, in our public life, as people, as pastors, as parents, as partners, as professionals? Keeping rules is all right as far as they take us. But you and I know that a system is only really healthy when the people who are running it can be trusted to do the right thing because that's the kind of people they are. Not because the right rules are in place, but because they are the right kind of people. We have all seen failures of leadership in our society that arguably stem from failure of character in every facet of contemporary life: banking and real estate and investing in sports and government and even nonprofit and church leadership arenas. And so the question I'm raising with us is a question of character, and the question of Christian character and how it impacts our practice of living. N.T. Wright says this, that Jesus teaches those who would follow him a character-forming set of actions which would project the generous love of God into the world, rather than merely projecting one's own achievements onto the screen of the watching cosmos. I'm going to say that again. Jesus teaches those who would follow him a character-forming set of actions which would project the generous love of God into the world, rather than merely projecting one's own achievements onto the screen of the watching cosmos. In other words, as we follow Jesus, he teaches us to practice being who we are. He teaches us to have our character shaped such that we can become the type of human beings God meant us to be in light of Christ's life and death and resurrection, in light of God's intended transformation of us and of all the world. In other words, Jesus teaches us to be those who reflect God's generous love into the world in very real and practical ways. Over and over again, Jesus challenges his hearers to a transformation of character. And following on his teachings, Paul, the writer of many of the letters in the New Testament, challenges his readers over and over again to a transformation of character in light of Christ. Which brings me to Paul's letter to Timothy. Kim mentioned in our time with young disciples that the New Testament is full of letters. And the letter to Timothy is a letter sort of written from a father figure to a son of the heart, if you will, from a parental one to a growing one. In this case, perhaps from a senior pastor to a junior pastor, but I think more widely than that, it's a letter written from one deeply formed in Christian faith to one who is seeking to grow in Christian character and leadership. Who are the Timothys in our midst, in our congregation? Is it our JP youth and our Tower youth? Are they the young ones in our midst who are growing in Christian character and formation? Are they the future Christian leaders of our world? Are the Timothys our young adults who have headed off to college or to the Peace Corps or to the challenging mission field of Wall Street and business ethics or law or medicine or classroom teaching? Are the Timothys of our congregation the next generation of church leaders? Our new elders, our new deacons? Are they your grandchildren? Are they people you see here? Are the Timothys of our congregation each of us? Are we, each of us, as parents and professionals and partners and people, are we the ones who are called to examine our own character and to grow in our Christian formation such that it will impact the world? The letter that Paul writes to Timothy is first and foremost a letter of pastoral care in which he charges Timothy with the life of discipleship, and Paul shares intimately and personally about the mystery of God and Jesus Christ, and he gives practical advice. He says to Timothy, avoid envy and slander. Don't fall into temptation of riches. Pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, gentleness, endurance. And I imagine Timothy had to unpack each and every one of those words and figure out what that meant for him in his own conversations with other people, in his own decisions in the office, in his own living out of the faith. Says Paul to Timothy at the peak of his letter. In fact, I think Paul is saying it to all of us. As for you, man of God, read that child of God, read that person of faith. As for you, fight the good fight. Take hold of the eternal life to which you were called and for which you made the good confession. Scholars speculate that the confession Paul references here could be from Timothy's ordination, or it could be from his baptism. And I think with that insight, Paul's letter opens up to all of us who have been ordained to church leadership and service, or all of us who bear the mark of baptism, the water dripping from our foreheads, as those whom God has called beloved. We are each of God's person, as Timothy was, and so these verses represent a personal charge to each of us who live as the baptized in the world to figure out what is the good fight. How are we to live in a way that has Christian integrity? Character formation requires at least three things: aiming at the right goal, figuring out the steps on how to get there, and making those steps a habit. And so whether the goal is a meaningful marriage, or upstanding business practices, or working for social justice or environmental stewardship, welcoming strangers, aiming at the right goal, figuring out the steps to get there, and practicing it until it becomes habit, second nature. Those are the acts of character formation. Do you know about Brighton Rock Candy? It was new to me, but it's my understanding that the identifying word Brighton isn't simply lacquered somehow on top of the candy so that after you've sucked it for a moment or bitten the first layer off, it's invisible. No, the word Brighton somehow goes all the way through the candy, such that wherever you cut or bite the stick, the letters will always be there. Following this analogy, our Christian character is that pattern of thinking and being which runs right through us so that wherever you cut into us, you see the same person following Christ all the way through. Our baptism is meant to be that kind of mark, not just a superficial mark traced on our foreheads long ago, but an identity that runs all the way through us and starts to shape and form how we think and act in all things after the manner and example of Christ himself. Child of God, fight the good fight, live the good life to which you were called and for which you have been marked in the sign of Christ himself. The Greek here is really contest the good contest. In other words, Paul knows that maintaining the faith and living the faith require energy and discipline and intentionality, much the way that an endurance athlete has to bring all of those to their training. A life that enduringly pursues such qualities as righteousness and godliness and faith and love and gentleness and generosity is an athletic life of faith, a life that requires energy, commitment, a life of wholeness and total commitment to the ways of God. To help us understand the importance of Christian formation, Wright offers this example, and it spoke to me. Pilot Chesley Sullenberger's successful landing of the plane in the Hudson River was a result of having so formed his character as a pilot by thousands of small choices and learned decisions and practice maneuvers over many years that when the ultimate test came, he did by second nature exactly what was required for the good of all. What amazed me was how Captain Sully acted as if what he did were natural. Others called it a miracle. But either way, he had not been born with the ability to fly a plane. The skills that were required, courage and restraint and cool judgment and concern for others, are not part of the kit we possess at birth. We have to work at acquiring that skill set, at mastering those ways of being. We have to practice being those kind of people over and over again, moving toward the goal that when moments of crisis come, it's second nature of us.